My name is Ted Tenthoff. I'm a Managing Director and Senior Biotechnology Analyst at Piper Jaffray. And Piper is again pleased to co-host the Cell and Gene Investor Day. I would like to thank the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine for their commitment to the space and also organizing another successful event. This is the first time we've done it up in Boston, so thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I can say, having done this over the last couple of years, it's pretty amazing to see the progress that's being made, not only at the company and corporate level, but at the research and scientific level, at the regulatory and financing level. It's really exciting, I think, for all of us who spend their time in this field, really, in the trenches, if you will, seeing just how much progress is being made. And I think all of us, it's easy to stay focused on what we have to do today and what we have to do tomorrow and next week. But I think it's very important to every once in a while take just a little look back at where we were and see just how far we've come. So thank you all for joining us. It's my pleasure to moderate our first panel today, which is entitled Cell Therapy Beyond Oncology. Where does the greatest potential lie? And I believe that this is actually an interesting subject as the field really is evolving faster than ever. The first approved and truly successful cell therapy, kind of looking back again, was really stem cell transplant. And while it's most often used in cancer, we're seeing it being used more and more in rare genetic diseases. And over the decades, progress has been made to dramatically improve stem cell transplantation, although some patients do not survive their transplant, typically more due to mismatches, graft versus host disease, and infection. And now with the advances in CAR T therapies, we are seeing the next evolution of cell therapy in cancer, which will be the topic of another panel, I think, this afternoon. Really, the first non-oncology cell therapies to be approved and used have primarily been for orthopedics and wound healing. And this morning, my medics presented, and this afternoon, ViaCyte will give a presentation, a company that actually acquired the Genzyme regenerative medicine business. We've also seen positive clinical data emerging from cell therapies in the field of cardiology. Mesoblast, Caladrius, BioCardia are all examples of that and are presenting. But our panel this morning really brings together a host of companies that are working outside of these fields, really in new, very exciting applications for cell and regenerative medicine. Joining me today, directly to my left, is Eduardo Bravo, who's the CEO of TiGenix. I'm also pleased to introduce Adam Gridley, who's the president and CEO of Histogenics. Ralph Kern, the COO, CMO of BrainStorm, is with us today. Paul Laikind, my good friend from ViaCyte, president and CEO. And last but certainly not least, Emile Nuwaysir, who's a Ph.D. and CEO of newly formed BlueRock. And I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. What we're going to do for this panel, since all these companies are doing things in very different areas, I'm going to start by asking each CEO to give a brief presentation on their company and on their technologies. I want to really ask each of you to keep it to 3 to 5 minutes so that we can save time for Q&A at the end. So to kick us off is going to be Eduardo.
Great. Thank you very much. So TiGenix is a cell therapy company that has two allogeneic platforms. The most advanced one is on adipose-derived stem cells, and we announced last year the first ever positive phase 3 clinical trial on a non-very glamorous indication, complex perianal fistula in Crohn's disease. And that phase 3 has been published in The Lancet, has been presented extensively at GI congresses, and we filed for approval in Europe. We are expecting actually approval to be granted before the end of this year. And we license ex-US rights for the primary indication to Takeda Pharmaceuticals. So we expect that Takeda will be launching CX-601 in Europe early in 2018, making it the first allogeneic stem cell product to make it to the market in Europe. In the US, we are working with the FDA, trying to avoid having to wait for the results of a second phase 3 clinical trial, and using some of the things that we're going to be discussing to expedite the approval of the product this side of the Atlantic. On top of this very advanced asset, we have two products in development. One is on these adipose-derived stem cells. It's an allogeneic intravenous injection for treating the complications of severe sepsis. And the last program is a cardiac stem cell, again, allogeneic cardiac stem cells, intracoronary administered only 5 to 7 days after myocardial infarction. And again, the idea is prevent the scar damage that ends up in congestive heart failure. So contrary to the companies trying to prevent or remodel the heart at the end in congestive heart failure patients, we're going very early on trying to reduce the scarring of the produced by the infarct.
Great, Eduardo, thanks for that overview. And just a quick question, if I may. You mentioned, and we'll talk more about the regulatory landscape, but are you currently in the process of running an additional phase 3? Has that started or not yet?
So we have an SPA in place for a global phase 3 that we have submitted it now to a number of countries as we will start recruiting in Europe. The phase 3 will start recruiting in the summer in Europe, and it will start recruiting first quarter of next year here in the US.
Okay, great. So Adam, maybe you can start next. If you had slides, I can get you the clicker too. Or...
That's all right. I can just walk you through it. So
okay. You're welcome to use the slide, so it's very easy if you want. Here, let me grab them. Sorry. There you go.
Okay. So I don't know if they set this up. No, it looks like they didn't. So I'll go ahead and we'll just do this verbally. So Histogenics is a regenerative medicine company. We are focused in knee cartilage repair. This is often described as the holy grail of orthopedics by orthopedic surgeons who are looking to treat knee cartilage defects. This is a defect that typically happens to young, healthy adults prior to or leading into osteoarthritis if not treated. So it's a huge market. It's an area that has been fraught with, I think, technical difficulty, regulatory difficulties for many, many years, and then manufacturing challenges. I'm not going to say that we've necessarily solved that, but we've been at this for close to 20 years. The company came out of the Brigham and Women's Harvard Medical School, and our concept is taking cells seeded into a scaffold, and we engineer those to create tissue ex vivo. What we think that's going to lead to is a much quicker return to function, early pain and functional relief, and ultimately long-term durability. And of course, because you're using an autologous cell source, we think it's going to be very safe. We're currently in phase 3 clinical trials. This is a trial that has been ongoing for 7 years. We've run out of money. We brought in manufacturing in-house. These are really tough trials to do, despite the fact that the market is enormous, and we expect to complete those trials here in the next month or two. I never thought that I'd say that. And it will be the largest prospectively conducted trial according to FDA guidance that took them ultimately 15 years to figure out how to regulate. And if everything goes well, we will be the only ones with a 1-year primary endpoint and potentially coming to market here in the next couple of years. Initially focused in the United States, we're doing some work in Japan, and because we've fully integrated the manufacturing, this is truly a platform opportunity where we think you can take this into other tissues as well.
Great, that's a very helpful overview. Ralph, I'll ask you to go next.
Sure. So thanks. I'm Ralph Kern. I'm the COO and CMO of BrainStorm Cell Therapeutics. So this is a biotech company based in the US and Israel, based on technology that was developed in Tel Aviv University. We're focused exclusively on neurodegenerative disorders. As you know, the unmet need and the potential is sky high. I mean, the unmet need of neurodegenerative disorders is basically oncology and diabetes added up and together and even more. And it's only getting worse because the biggest risk for neurodegenerative diseases is age, and our population's aging, and it's going to be an economic health crisis all over the world. So the way we've approached this is by built on very strong technology, on an ability to generate a conventional treatment with unconventional means, in other words, cell-based therapy. They're mesenchymal stromal cell-based cells that are converted, expanded, secrete very high predictable levels of neurotrophic factors, have immunomodulatory effects as well. And we've applied them to the most important neurodegenerative disorders. So first, we're looking at ALS. We've been able to successfully complete the early work. We completed a very well-done randomized controlled trial in ALS in the US, 48 patients. The results are were surprising, to say the least, and very encouraging. So we're about to start a big phase 3 program in ALS with 200 patients, 6 sites in the US. We're ready to go, and all pistons are firing. The way the cells work is that it's not a cell replacement therapy. It's also not a. It's based on the secretion of the cells. So each cell is a living drug delivery system. And we deliver a very predictable product to the central nervous system directly by intrathecal delivery, and that avoids the blood-brain barrier, which, as you know, has been plaguing the pharmaceutical industry for decades. So we avoid that, and we're able to deliver the neurotrophic factors that are important to this disease. We have plans to look at demyelinating disease as well. There's different types of demyelinating disease we're going to look at in terms of progressive MS and perhaps neuromyelitis optica. We have very, very strong platform of preclinical data in Parkinson's, Huntington's, Alzheimer's, and demyelinating disease, and ALS, of course. And we have plans to explore all of those avenues. But obviously, we want to do solid steps first. So we want to get this phase 3 program started. And I think we have, we're building on we're standing on the shoulders of giants, because a lot of the work that the CAR-T programs have created in terms of awareness, regulatory awareness, the regulatory pathway, manufacturing, the biobanking, making the cells available, and also just changing the people's antibody reactions to cell-based therapies, pardon the pun. So I think that we can get people comfortable with this approach and get people to think that this is a standard treatment that will become valuable for patients with neurodegenerative disorders.
Great. Thanks, Ralph. Paul?
All right, well, I did have slides, but I'll stick with the program of not using my slides. So I am representing ViaCyte. It's a really exciting company in San Diego, California. We're private. Our focus is on a stem cell-derived islet replacement therapy, which we believe has the potential to provide essentially a cure for patients with type 1 diabetes and an important therapy for insulin-dependent type 2 patients. The company's been around for quite a while, over a decade, and that's reflected in our intellectual property portfolio. We have over 450 issued patents and 700 pending applications in the area. And we're focused right now on 2 products that we have in development. They both are delivering the same cell therapy, so let me step back and talk a little bit about that. So the way we approach this disease and this treatment is we start with an embryonic stem cell bank that we banked a number of years ago. The cell line is called Site49. We have master and working cell banks that is the starting material for the manufacture of our products. We then go through a directed differentiation protocol to bring that to a pancreatic progenitor cell. This is a collection of cells that are endocrine in nature that are essentially destined to go on with further differentiation to become essentially islet tissues, indistinguishable from a normal islet. So the ability to produce insulin, glucagon, somatostatin, all of the various factors under the regulation of the glucose levels in the patient. So we then take that and we put that into a device. So it is a combination product of the cell therapy in a delivery device. And the 2 products that we're developing right now are the same cells but different ways of delivering them. So one is a fully encapsulated device in what we call the Encaptura drug delivery system or cell delivery system, and it is meant to protect the cells from the immune system, because these, of course, are human cells, but they're not the patient cells, so it's an allogeneic treatment, and so we need to protect them against the immune system. That's really the holy grail for this, the ability to treat essentially all patients with type 1 as well as insulin-dependent type 2. The other product that we were developing at the same time is we call PEC-Direct, and it delivers the same cells but in a device that has an open architecture. We engineer pores into it that allow direct vascularization. That makes for a much more easy to engraft, easy to use product, but then it requires immune suppression. So that one is designed for a high-risk patient population. There's already good proof of concept that you can cure type 1 diabetes with a islet replacement therapy. That comes from cadaver islets where they bring from pancreases. It often takes a couple pancreases to isolate enough islets, and then you can treat those, put them in, it's typically put into the liver portal vein. And there are patients now that are this was first developed about 20 years ago up in Canada, and there are patients now that have gone 20 years completely insulin independent and cured, and the majority of patients that receive this go for 5 years or longer. However, there's a very limited supply of pancreases to do this with, and so we give the promise of an unlimited supply of cells. Like our PEC Direct, that is for the high-risk patients because it does require immunosuppression. So where are we? We put PEC and CAP into the clinic. We decided to move forward with that one first. We knew there'd be a foreign body response to the device that we put in. We had various data from the animals, from permissive models to more aggressive models, but we didn't know where humans were. What we found is humans are more aggressive, okay, when it comes to foreign body response. So with that clinical trial, we've done about 20 patients, and we've shown that it was safe. We've shown that the encapture device would protect the cells against the immune system. We showed that when they did engraft, when they became vascularized, the cells would do what we expect them to do, further differentiating into islet tissue. But we also found that we had more work to do to get a good, consistent engraftment, robust engraftment with that product. So with that, we immediately shifted and moved towards PEC Direct, moving into clinic. We're starting clinical trials in the next month or so with that. And it's really the low-hanging fruit here. We know from PEC and CAP that when it gets vascularized and engrafted, it should work. So we're very confident that this one now is going to be an effective treatment. So we're pushing forward that in the clinic now, and we're really excited about the future for this area.
Great, that's excellent, Paul. Emile?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak here. BlueRock is a platform cell therapy company developing allogeneic universal cell strategy for degenerative diseases like Parkinson's and heart failure. Our goal is to liberate the patient from the burden of the disease to effectively reverse the disease by replacing that essential protagonist cell, the cell that was lost in degeneration. So in Parkinson's, we're talking about that midbrain dopaminergic neuron whose job is to control motor function from the midbrain. In heart failure, we're talking about the musculature of the heart, the muscle cell that's lost after MI, for example. Our goal is to repair the human body when it can no longer repair itself. That's the concept. We're doing this through industrial control of the pluripotent stem cell and the manufacture of that protagonist cell and the stable long-term engraftment, a lot like Paul was describing for diabetes. We are, I think if you were to you asked at some point, what is our culture? That was one of the questions. It's, I'd say, characterized by two things: a profound sense of urgency, because these diseases it is unbelievable need and opportunity, and by, I think, the highest ethical standards, how to get there the fastest we can in the highest ethical way. We were founded in December of 2016, just a little bit ago. We're a joint venture. The founders, it was a joint venture between Versant Ventures, a sort of a top-tier venture capital firm, and Bayer Life Sciences. Bayer Pharmaceuticals, a top-tier pharma. And that gives us, a really, I think, a beautiful embedded perspective of a VC and a pharma perspective, and we're taking advantage of both of those. We have a Series A financing of $225 million, which gives us the ability to think long-term. We're not focused on a 12-month milestone. We're focused on making a measurable difference in these diseases, and that's, I think, the vision of the founders, to give us that freedom to do that. Our scientific founders are Gordon Keller and Lawrence Studer, who I personally have the highest respect for as leaders in the field, and who bring that highest ethical standard. Our lead program is Parkinson's, and we will be, if all goes well, have an IND filed within about a year, and we'll be in patients by the middle of next year. Lawrence has a well-advanced program, and I really am hopeful that that will prove that we can reverse the effects of that disease, that we can effectively reverse the motor symptoms of Parkinson's, and it will make a measurable difference. We have another whole set of programs in cardiac led by Gordon Keller and his team, which are following on. And as a platform company, we intend to add other programs, which we'll be talking about. So please pay attention. I'll be telling more about it. But that's essentially our story.
Great. So. Excellent. Emile, thank you so much. And thank you all. That was brief, on target, pointed, interesting, exactly what I was hoping for. So now to shake it up a little bit, I want to have a little bit more interactive dialogue as I go through sort of some general questions. And I think really probably one of the most interesting things to have changed since the last meeting last year in New York is some of the new stuff on the regulatory side. And obviously with the passing of the 21st Century Cures Act, and also in particular this designation of regenerative medicine advanced technology, or RMAT, that people have been talking about. So I want to ask you as a group, and maybe Eduardo, you can kick us off just because you're dealing with this and you mentioned this in your presentation with your interactions with the United States, but how does this change the playing field for regenerative medicines, for cellular therapies?
I think that the big advantage is that cell therapy has had all the headwind when you were talking with investors, and all these breakthrough designation and fast tracks were seen as maybe not ideal for us. I think that the fact that this designation exists, that will combine a little bit the benefits of both, certainly has put the cell therapy space back into, wow, indeed, cell therapy products will be seen as revolutionary by the FDA, and some of the programs may be fast-tracked the way that some of the oncology programs are being fast-tracked. So what we've seen is that that opens, at least for us, the door of eventually avoiding finalizing the phase 3 and getting into the market earlier. And I think that investors get this excitement that indeed you're going to be shortening the time to market significantly.
Great. Anyone else have commentary on this? Yes, please, Ralph, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So if you read the 21st Century's Cures Act, it's really a work in progress. There's so many work streams, and I think that it remains to be fully fleshed out. But from our perspective, as a company that's trying to sort of address the unmet need in neurodegenerative disorders, it's really a trifecta. There's an increased focus on really understanding the epidemiology of neurodegenerative disorders. It's not fully appreciated. A lot of people go undiagnosed, and there's actually a very specific part of the 21st Century's Cures Act that is going to facilitate the collection of that kind of data, because we don't know how many people actually have these conditions. Secondly, there's a real focus on rare diseases, which I think is really, again, the bullseye for us, because we're looking at rare neurodegenerative disorders. So again, that's another area of focus for us. And the third area is the regulatory pathway. And I think that if we can get much more consistency in the regulatory pathways, where, for example, if you have a cell therapy, it goes through a CBER. If you have a small molecule, it goes to CDER. Sometimes never the twain shall meet. We really want to have a consistent level playing field, so that when we introduce a cell-based therapy, that we have the same parameters that are being applied to the non-cell-based therapies.
Please, Paul.
Well, I agree with what was just said. I think our experience working with the regulators has been generally quite good. What we found is they're quite interested in what we're doing. We're obviously, I think everybody on this stage is blazing trails in the areas we're working in, and the regulators absolutely recognize that. And they're looking to learn along with us. They need to up their game to be able to deal with these types of products, and so they are very involved, very engaged. I think, even before the 21st century, we had breakthrough therapy designation. If you look at those two regulations, they're very similar. I think the 21st century and the regenerative medicine, I think it will be more assured to get the designation, but in terms of what they do for you, it's the same. But I think what's most important is, the regulators, we're working on cures, okay? We're not just working on, incremental changes to diseases, and the regulators get that.
Well, maybe just to pick up on that commentary, or on that comment, because what really institutionally does the FDA have to change, either in their processes or in the way they're looking at these regenerative medicines and cell therapies, that is different than biotherapeutics, like antibodies, that is different than small molecules? I mean, what do they have to do that's different on the regulatory process?
Well, in our case, we're a combination therapy. So, we work with CBER as a biologic, but we have the device. And there's definitely, we've seen, them making their own changes to try to address how to bring those two components together when you're doing a combination product like ours. But, I think it's an evolving platform for the agency, and they're working hard to keep up with it.
I'd actually characterize it as a partnership, and I think we've had a very good experience, and I think that's been evidenced by the great folks at ViaCyte, who recently got approval for a product that was developed in many cases 15 years ago. And we have seen, independent of the 21st Century Cures Act, a great desire to partner. Good scientific data, I think, is going to win the day in many of those cases. And I think the sort of box that folks were put in the past, and you just follow the regs, don't exist anymore. So we've had a great experience, and as long as you're coming in with good science, good mechanism of action, there's a good conversation to be had. And as long as you get in early and you're making sure the agency is aware of what's going on, we've got a similar situation where we've got CBER and CDRH opining. And as long as there are no surprises, I think they've been very open and do want to bring these curative therapies into place because they're seeing such a demonstrable change versus the current standard of care. And if you're going to leapfrog from an efficacy perspective, you got to leapfrog from a scientific perspective.
Emile, did you?
Well, I would just add to both questions that both of them speak to, what will we do? It's incumbent on this room. I mean, the Regenerative Medicine Act is a work in progress, as we said, and we as a community are going to define what it means. So I think it's our job to do that and to make sure it works for us. So I'd encourage everybody to get involved. The other thing I'd say is that I think it's had there's a lot of folklore and a lot of sort of generalized concerns about cell therapy and these newer therapies. And I think the idea that there's a newer set of regulatory constructs coming has relieved some of the naysayers, that it's made it easier to have these conversations. Traditionally conservative big companies are getting less, I think, are exploring it again. So.
Well, I want to ask, picking up on that point, Emile, because are we leaving safety behind? And how important does safety still have to be even in these accelerated pathways? And I'll just ask each of you to comment on that, because I feel like in the lay press, sometimes maybe that's a question that is raised, are we forfeiting on safety to accelerate these cures? So I just thought I'd bounce that question to all of you if you have a thought on it.
Well, I think I would just add that I'm sure everybody's going to nod when I say that we're not going to compromise safety. The worst thing we could do is to do that. So, but these cell therapies, again, it's not that complicated if you understand what you're manufacturing and you have good data. I would just say I don't think that by accelerating the path anyone would compromise safety.
I agree. I think safety is still key. We're not such a rare disease play. We're talking about diabetes, which is a large number of patients. So we definitely have to have a very high bar for safety. One of the advantages we have is we're not introducing a foreign molecule to these patients. We're giving human cells that are producing human insulin in its absolutely natural form. So that's a real positive for what we're doing. In our case, we also have the encapsulation, which means we can pull it back out if we need to, and that's been really helpful with the regulators.
Great.
Yeah, I think the evidentiary standards shouldn't change, but I think from an approval perspective, I think there should be an open mind that if there's a treatment such as a cure or a treatment that halts or reverses, a disease that's often fatal, that there should be a pathway that allows for some type of provisional approval with continued evidence development. I think that the European model is really a good one, and I think that would be a very favorable pathway, and obviously with a continued requirement to generate data as the treatments roll out.
So Ralph, let me pick up on that, because in a way, isn't 21st century's cure just sort of catching us up to what the Europeans were already doing and what the Japanese were already doing, certainly through some of their stuff. So maybe we can kind of look a little bit more global for a second and make some compare and contrast. Is it still easier to do business in Japan right now, or is there more interest? Will 21st centuries help us get there here in the United States? Just open that kind of the more global question. Please go ahead, Adam.
I'd be happy to jump in. We've got some very recent evidence of this. Just got back from Tokyo a couple weeks ago, and so we're sort of a Japanese-based company originally, where our co-founder comes from there. Many of our raw materials come from there. And last year, we regained rights to Japan. So I've been there 4 times over the last 6 months. It has been an amazing experience. There is no question that safety standards will not be compromised, whether it be here in the United States or in Japan. That is the same bar and will always be the same bar. And the nice thing about a lot of these cell therapies, you're taking same cell source, so you don't have that initial foreign body issue that one would worry about. But what you're seeing is an accelerated standard on the efficacy side. And the Japanese regulators, I think, are actually paving the way and are looking at probable evidence of efficacy versus we need 5 years of efficacy. And in many of these cases, you got such a dramatic cure, and our experience has been fantastic. And I think the agency is going that direction as well. So I think it's a great model. And I don't think you're sidestepping any regulations. I don't think you're sacrificing any efficacy, but in many cases, you're taking global data that is available, and instead of running multiple studies in multiple locations, you're looking at a compendium where you say, hey, the standards are the same globally. And Japan, I think, is leading the way. We've had a great experience there, and it's possible we may cut 3 to 5 years off of the development pathway, but not compromise safety whatsoever.
Yeah. Emile, do you have a comment? Yeah.
Speaking from the perspective of a guy who was in a public company that, while looking, out in the world for strategic deals, found Japan to be much more fertile ground and ended up getting acquired by a Japanese company. I can say that I hope that the new perspective on the regulatory path reverses the trend. We've seen a lot of really big deals moving towards Japan over the last 3 or 4 years. My company being acquired by one, my previous company is an example. And I hope that this will reverse the trend for the investors and
it's a great point.
Market.
Eduardo, I want to get your commentary just from the European side too, because here's an example where you're seeking approval in Europe and still trying to kind of find the way in the US. So I don't know if you have any comments on just sort of how you view the European system versus what may be evolving in the US.
Well, I think being pioneers, sometimes you are too early. So unfortunately, we missed the PRIME designation in Europe, and we did the phase 3. We had orphan designation in Europe, and what at that time the EMA agreed was that a single phase 3 would be sufficient to file for approval. And that's what we've done. We delivered the data, and then we filed, and we've seen that the European authorities provided that the data is very good and very robust, and I think that data will make the difference. They were ready for approval. I think in the US, what I've seen with the FDA is that they are extremely flexible. I have to say, again, in our interactions, we had an SPA in place at the beginning. It was like, you need to do a second phase 3. We went for an SPA. We've been able to reopen the SPA once we had the European data and significantly change it to make it more flexible and smaller. So that shows that the agency is ready to compromise. Now we want to go one step further and decide, like, okay, we will do the phase 3, but in the meantime, why can't we have, conditional approval?
Hope we can do that. So I want to pause here for a moment because I think this really is a crucial topic for the industry, and we've got access to these CEOs. So I want to see if there are any questions from the audience about regulation, sort of about any of the topics that we've started with. And I'm going to transition a little bit to manufacturing because I think this is crucial not just towards regulatory, also towards commercial success, and really as the field is maturing, I think becoming really where the rubber hits the pavement, if you will. So there's some obvious differences between autologous approaches and allogeneic approaches or off-the-shelf products. So how are you guys individually scaling manufacturing, and where does FDA fit into all of this? And really, anyone who wants to start us off. Ralph, I'm going to point to you first in the middle.
I'll take it. Never sit in the middle. I'll take a stab at it. So obviously, I think we need to differentiate autologous from allogeneic, and also the numbers of patients with the diseases. The epidemiology is very different. I think someone earlier today mentioned, the size of the population that needs to be treated. I think that our approach has been to only work with proven entities, to work on shortening a lot of the logistical steps between when the cells are taken and when they're actually delivered to the patient, to make that as simple and as short as possible. The other approach that we've taken is to use cryopreservation so that a person's cells can be collected, they can be expanded, they can be preserved for up to 2 years, and then when needed, they can be quickly defrosted, so to speak. And then differentiated, and then quickly turned around so they can actually go to the point of care with really not too much difficulty. So that's been a huge transition for us. It's a learning game. I think that a lot of what we're doing, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. So a lot of the a lot of the technology really has come out of CAR-T and some other companies that have really led the way, both in terms of what we do logistically, but also on the regulatory side, because there's a much greater understanding now of what that means, and don't get the same questions over and over again. It's a much better, sort of journey.
Paul, please.
Yeah, so we're on the other side, we're the allogeneic. We've actually done all the manufacturing ourselves. We still are manufacturing. It's actually 3 manufacturing streams because we manufacture the cells, we manufacture a device, and then we have to manufacture a combination product. Interestingly, our biggest competitor up to about a year ago was J&J. They had a division called Janssen Betalogics that was doing some of the same work we were over the last decade. About a year ago, we merged that into us. J&J is our largest single investor, and so Betalogics now works with us. So they were looking at the manufacturing, and we're looking more at outsourcing kind of third-party manufacturing, whereas we were doing it in-house. So we've been able to compare notes on that. And I think we made the right choice on doing it ourselves initially, but certainly as we look down towards, getting more towards the patient into commercialization, we've been from the very beginning looking at how to scale this, how to scale it up. It's interesting. I mean, in some ways, the whole antibody field where you have bioreactors that make the cells and they take the antibodies and they don't care about the cells. We're the opposite. We don't care about that. We want the cells. So, we're using stirred bioreactors and that type of thing. But there's a lot of innovation that still is to come in this field, no doubt about it.
Great.
I think that that's what distinguishes this moment from previous moments is for many of these, we now have manufacturability. We can actually make the cell. In the case of our lead program, the Parkinson's neurons, the midbrain dopaminergic neurons, you can make them. But it's not a single problem. Manufacturability is a box with allo and auto and small and large dose, and there's 4 separate problems in that box. And any therapy you're doing could be in any one of the. We have probably every box on this stage. So I think. In a small dose allo indication, manufacturability isn't a really big deal. 10 million midbrain dopaminergic neurons per patient is not a big deal. A billion cardiomyocytes in an auto function, that is a big deal. So it depends on the problem.
Adam, did you
We've got a similar experience where we're going to allo. Auto actually enables allo, and in our case, we're fully integrated only because there were no other capabilities. And from a regulatory perspective, you first think about compliance and avoiding that CRL. Then you think about cost of goods sold, because every time you're out raising money, you have are you going to be another Dendron? And can you afford to actually make this and make it affordable for patients? And in our case, we had to bring all of this in-house, and we had to pause our trial for a couple of years. Luckily, we had good investors who had that long-term view. It's going to enable us to then develop an enormous platform opportunity, which is sort of the byproduct of trying to control manufacturing early. But that's the one thing that investors still get hung up on. And if you're not thinking about it early, you're not going to be able to commercialize product.
Excellent. With the time that we have left, and this has been a really, really great conversation, obviously one of the buzzwords right now in the entire biotech industry is drug pricing. No one really seems to be willing to go on record to discuss the cost of a CAR-T, let alone the preconditioning procedures and treatments. I guess we'll be finding that out pretty soon, though, in that field. So how are you guys preparing for commercialization and thinking about cost? Again, talk about an evolving area, but what are some of the things that even as a clinical or near commercial company you guys are doing? And Eduardo, sure.
So what we've done is do it like, if it was a normal pharmaceutical product, at the end we're going to be treating patients. It's just another way of treating those patients. It's a single dose. So we're looking at what are the costs that, the systems are incurring when treating those patients with complex perianal fistulas. And we've seen that, with a single dose, there is plenty of room for pricing these drugs at a price that is reasonable for the system and will make a very nice margin for the company.
For us, it's much more about patient-reported outcomes now. So we're looking at the entire cost, the continuum of care. In our particular case, cartilage, which leads to osteoarthritis, which leads to total knee. And here it's health economics data. It's quality of life. It's less opioids. It's that entire cost of the therapy that insurers are starting to look at, which may command higher prices up front, but save a tremendous amount of money over time. And I think that's going to require a lot of conversations with payers. It goes into cost of goods sold, but it also goes to collecting the best clinical data possible. Historically, for us, it was MRI. That doesn't tell you anything about pain and function. And so that's where we're turning our efforts.
Great.
Yeah, so I think, I'm with Eduardo on this. I think it's mostly a cost per dose thinking. But there are new, ways of thinking about pricing in terms of cost per patient, value-based pricing, where, for example, the payments could be almost on an annuity basis, particularly for gene therapy. I mean, that's one approach that's being looked at there. So I think that the world's evolving very quickly. I don't see that there's any definite solutions yet beyond the cost per dose, but again, everyone's open to try to find those solutions, because what we want to do is get as many patients treated as possible at the end of the day.
Paul and Emile?
Yeah, I think the key word here is evolving. The whole, how do you price a cure? Okay, how do you price something where you've cured a major disease? And I think that is going to evolve. I think the value-based, the annuity type approach is certainly being thought about. What we look at from a perspective of when we're looking at, for instance, treating or curing a type 1 diabetes patients, we look and say, well, what does it take to manage a type 1 diabetes? What's the cost of managing that? And if you go out to JDRF or some of the organizations that take a look at that, it's in the neighborhood of $8,000 to $10,000 a year just to manage it. That doesn't count all of the long-term complications and various other things that impact the system. And then you think of a cure or something, let's say, lasts 5 years, so that's the way of thinking about the pricing, but how to then get that out to the system is the big question.
Yeah, and I think depending on the disease and the cell and the therapeutic mode, there might be precedent for these kinds of things. I mean, in our Parkinson's program, there's already a well-established protocol for deep brain stimulation where the surgery is guided by MRI, I think, and it's the same sort of, you're implanting a device deep down in the midbrain in the same location. That's analogous to implanting a cell. Left ventricular assist device for heart failure patients. There are, depending on the disease, there is precedent for sort of a single event, sort of curative or semi-curative therapy. So I think it depends, but it's evolving.
Great. Excellent. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank all of you for a very interesting and interactive conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground. This panel probably could have been double the time and we could have gone into even more detail, but I really appreciate the hard work you guys are doing and the progress that you're making, and we look forward to following that progress, and hopefully we'll get to talk about it next year. Thanks.